Welcome back to Canintel 420. This content is for educational and informational purposes only. It does not promote or encourage the use, sale, or cultivation of cannabis where prohibited by law. Always follow your local, state, and tribal regulations and consume responsibly where legal to do so. Acapulco Gold stands as one of the few cultivars whose legend eclipsed the plant itself. Its name woven into counterculture long before cannabis entered legality or laboratory testing. Originating in the coastal highlands surrounding Acapulco, Mexico, it developed under a precise confluence of environmental conditions: long photoperiods, warm maritime days tempered by cool mountain nights, and mineral-rich volcanic soil. These variables triggered pigment and resin expressions that produced the strain's trademark golden green hue and complex aroma. By the late 1960s, Acapulco Gold was arriving in the United States, not as compressed brick, but as carefully cured flour. For a generation accustomed to rough, low-grade imports, its brightness and fragrance were transformative. Its name became a benchmark for authenticity and potency, circulating through underground channels, surf culture, and rock lyrics as shorthand for excellence. It wasn't advertised, it was mythologized. Chemically, Acapulco Gold represents a classic THC-dominant land race, historically averaging between 17 to 20% THC in its original phenotypes, with negligible CBD content. What gave it identity, however, was its terpene architecture. The primary matrix, terpinolene, pinene, and limonene, supported by trace levels of myrcene and B-caryophyllene, defined both its sensory tone and its neurological footprint. Terpinolene anchors that architecture. It is a monoterpene synthesized early in the MEP pathway, responsible for the cultivar's herbal citrus bouquet and its head-focused cognitive expansion. Neurologically, terpinolene expresses through mild dopaminergic modulation and limbic stimulation, generating a sense of creative elevation without the overstimulation associated with THC saturation. Apinene, present at moderate concentration, sharpens short-term memory and attentional focus by counteracting acetylcholinesterase inhibition, effectively balancing terpinolene's diffuse lift. Limonene, a cyclic monoterpene that interacts with 5-HT1A receptor sites, contributes mood elevation and emotional buoyancy, the biochemical basis for the cultivar's reputation as sunlight in botanical form. The secondary terpenes round out the physiological experience. Myrcene, though lower in concentration than in Afghan or Kush lineages, softens the cerebral energy with gentle physical composure. It slows the rate of THC diffusion without causing sedation, preserving function while damping anxiety. B-caryophyllene, the only common terpene known to bind directly to CB2 receptors, anchors the experience at the peripheral level, reducing inflammation and stress signaling without intoxicating effects. Together, these compounds build a layered high that is both functional and euphoric, promoting focus, sociability, and sensory enhancement rather than overwhelm. In lived experience, Acapulco Gold's onset manifests as clarity, heightened perception, sharpened dialogue, and an internal brightness that feels guided rather than chaotic. The cultivar's power lay not in sheer potency, but in equilibrium. Unlike modern hybrids bred to chase THC percentage, Acapulco Gold's chemistry delivered coherence, a euphoric but task-compatible state that fit seamlessly into daily rhythm. It became the archetype of a daylight cultivar, uplifting, creative, and purposeful. Culturally, Acapulco Gold transcended botany. By the early 1970s, its name appeared in Hunter S. Thompson's writing, echoed through Jefferson Airplane lyrics, and stood as the measure by which other cannabis was judged. The phrase itself evolved into cultural shorthand for anything pure, golden, and elite, an unintentional brand forged entirely by experience. Decades later, the name still carries weight, reminding the industry that authenticity was once defined by quality, not marketing. If Acapulco Gold represented sunlight, sharp, open, and expansive, Afghan Kush embodied the opposite pole, cool, enclosed, and grounding. Originating in the Hindu Kush mountain range straddling modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, It evolved under vastly different environmental pressures. Harsh altitude conditions, short growing seasons, and intense ultraviolet exposure shaped a plant that was compact, resinous, and chemically dense. Where Acapulco Gold adapted to light and airflow, Afghan Kush adapted to survival, developing thick trichome coverage as a natural UV shield and moisture retention system. Chemically, Afghan Kush expresses a radically different profile. It is a myrcene-dominant cultivar, often supported by B-caryophyllene, humulene, and trace linalool, a terpene quartet that defines what many modern consumers interpret as indica characteristics. THC concentration in native Afghan varieties averages between 15 to 18%, but unlike tropical land races, the ratio of terpenes to cannabinoids is higher, amplifying the perceived heaviness of its effect. Myrcene dominates both the aroma and pharmacology, producing the signature earthy, musky tone and encouraging muscular relaxation through synergistic permeability enhancement at the blood-brain barrier. This allows THC to cross more efficiently, amplifying onset intensity while simultaneously slowing cognitive rhythm. The result is the deep physical ease and slowed mental cadence that have become synonymous with Kushline relaxation. B-caryophyllene interacts through CB2 receptor pathways to lower inflammation and stabilize physical tension, giving Afghan Kush its restorative, body-centered tone. Humulene, often present at moderate levels, contributes to appetite modulation and anti-inflammatory action, reinforcing a grounded calm rather than sedation. Linalool, though subtle, adds a floral top note while supporting parasympathetic activation through GABAergic pathways, creating the exhale sensation many describe when Afghan Kush takes hold. Where Acapulco Gold's terpinolene opened the perceptual field outward, Afghan Kush's myrcene and caryophyllene close it inward, narrowing sensory bandwidth and reinforcing bodily awareness. The effect is not simply heaviness, it is consolidation. Neural activity slows, respiration deepens, and attention turns inward, producing a form of embodied focus that serves recovery, pain relief, or introspection. The plant does not induce lethargy by default. Its chemistry induces stillness, a physiological cue to rest and repair. In its native context, Afghan Kush was cultivated for function, not recreation. Resin extraction and hashish production were central to regional economies, with trichome-heavy phenotypes favored for haras and temple ball processing. The thick stalks and shorter stature of the plants made them ideal for repeated resin collection without structural damage. Over centuries, farmers in regions like Mazar-e-Sharif refined these selections into stable seed lines, high in trichome density, aromatic oils, and resistance to temperature extremes. These landraces formed the genetic foundation for nearly every modern Kush and Indica hybrid that emerged in the Western world after the 1970s. When Afghan Kush first entered global circulation, it arrived as dense, aromatic hash rather than cured flower. Western consumers encountering it for the first time often described it as the physical counterpoint to Acapulco Gold's mental lift, a strain that dissolved tension and replaced anxiety with quiet equilibrium. That association would later evolve into the shorthand Indica equals sign night, a generalization born not from taxonomy but from chemical consequence. Afghan Kush's molecular structure supported rest and repair, not sleepiness by default, yet, as the market matured, nuance gave way to convenience. In effect, Afghan Kush became the archetype of the night cultivar, restorative, centering, and physically complete. Its balance of cannabinoids and terpenes was tailored by nature to withstand extremes, and that resilience translated directly into its human experience. Where Acapulco Gold thrived under the sun, Afghan Kush spoke the language of shadow. Together they defined the polarity that modern marketing later simplified into a binary. Where the myth collapses. When Acapulco Gold and Afghan Kush appear side by side on dispensary menus, they are almost always cast as opposites. Acapulco Gold is marketed as the quintessential daytime sativa, uplifting, cerebral, and energizing, while Afghan Kush is sold as its mirror image, the archetypal nighttime indica, sedative, heavy, and resinous. One is positioned for focus and daylight function, the other for rest and recovery. This polarity has persisted for decades, shaping how consumers frame their choices and how the industry scripts its sales language. Yet, when you examine their chemistry, that polarity disintegrates almost immediately. At the molecular level, both cultivars occupy the same classification, THC-dominant land races, each generally ranging between 17 and 21% THC with negligible CBD presence. This similarity eliminates the idea that cannabinoid balance drives their perceived contrast. What differentiates them and simultaneously unites them is terpene composition, the network of volatile molecules that governs effect, aroma, and neurological tone. One of the clearest intersections lies in limonene, a compound that threads through both cultivars despite their divergent reputations. In Acapulco Gold, limonene integrates with terpinolene and pinene to create its crisp mood lift and emotional brightness. In Afghan Kush, present at lower but still notable concentrations, limonene counterbalances the sedative tendency of myrcene, preventing the high from collapsing into lethargy. Functionally, this means that both strains deliver a subtle current of optimism, a steady mood elevation that complicates the narrative of one being daytime euphoria and the other nighttime sedation. B-caryophyllene forms another shared axis. As one of the only terpenes known to bind directly to CB2 receptors, it modulates inflammation and tension while anchoring the high outside of THC's psychoactive domain. In Acapulco Gold, it tempers the strain's mental expansion, grounding it and keeping creativity organized. In Afghan Kush, it complements myrcene by deepening the body calm without suppressing mental clarity. In both, it ensures that physical ease remains steady, not slumped, a common zone of calm that defies the binary. Myrcene exposes the misunderstanding most clearly. In Acapulco Gold, it plays a secondary role, moderate levels smoothing terpinolene stimulation and providing mild relaxation. In Afghan Kush, myrcene dominates, thickening the physical texture of the high and reinforcing muscular calm. Yet across both cultivars, the terpene performs the same biochemical function, slowing neural signaling and enhancing THC absorption to round the experience. The difference is quantitative, not categorical, a matter of concentration, not identity. Marketing transforms that gradient into opposition, branding one as bright and the other as heavy when both rely on the same chemical mechanism. Supporting terpenes exaggerate the split visually and aromatically, but not mechanistically. Acapulco Gold's terpinolene and pinene amplify its top-end sharpness and clarity, whereas Afghan Kush's humulene introduces woody restraint and appetite regulation. These sensory accents alter the texture of the high, but not its foundation. Both still pivot around the same triad, THC, limonene, and caryophyllene, supported by myrcene's balancing weight. That shared core explains why, in practical experience, neither strain fits the caricature. Acapulco Gold, labeled the daytime sativa, often delivers focused calm and social composure rather than raw drive. Afghan Kush, branded the nighttime indica, frequently relaxes the body without fogging the mind, encouraging reflection and conversation rather than sedation. Viewed side by side, the myth fractures completely. The day versus night story was not born from chemical truth, but from commercial simplicity. Classifying strains by time of use created a digestible marketing framework, easy to sell, easy to remember, and utterly divorced from reality. For the consumer, though, the science tells a different story. Acapulco Gold and Afghan Kush are not polar opposites, but adjacent variations along a single continuum. Their shared terpenes, limonene, caryophyllene, and myrcene, define overlapping experiences shaped by ratio, not lineage. The perceived divide is one of emphasis, not essence. When chemistry is aligned side by side, the myth of day versus night collapses, revealing what has always been there: one plant, two expressions, and a culture still learning how to read what it grows. Beyond the binary, moving toward real cannabis literacy. The comparison between Acapulco Gold and Afghan Kush reveals a truth that reaches far beyond two famous cultivars. It dismantles the entire architecture of how cannabis has been categorized for half a century. The traditional dichotomy of daytime sativa versus nighttime indica has persisted not because it reflects chemical reality, but because it simplifies a complex plant into a marketable story. That story has been convenient for branding, but chemically, it's unsustainable. Cannabis operates across gradients, not walls. Its effects arise from a matrix of terpenes, cannabinoids, and ratios that resist binary classification. For consumers, this outdated framework has produced generations of confusion. The promise of stimulation from sativa and sedation from indica continues to misalign expectation with biology. Many find themselves uplifted by cultivars labeled indica or soothed by those labeled sativa, and the inconsistency erodes confidence, not in the plant, but in the system used to describe it. The chemistry has never been unreliable. The language has. By reducing a diverse biochemical organism to two adjectives, the market created an illusion of predictability that experience consistently contradicts. For bud tenders and educators, this realization demands a linguistic shift, one rooted in terpene literacy rather than inherited shorthand. The accurate answer to "why does this strain feel uplifting?" is not because it's a sativa, but because it expresses terpinolene and limonene. When a customer seeks calm without sedation, the right guidance is to look towards cultivars expressing myrcene and caryophyllene in balanced ratios, not to point toward an indica shelf. This precision replaces assumption with understanding. It empowers both educator and consumer, allowing professionals to earn credibility through accuracy and consumers to make informed choices rooted in chemistry rather than myth. On the industry side, moving past the binary has implications that stretch from marketing to regulation. Product design could highlight terpene composition transparently, helping consumers identify profiles aligned with their goals, focus, relaxation, creativity, relief, without resorting to misleading categories. Regulators could standardize labeling, requiring terpene breakdowns alongside cannabinoid data to ensure clarity and reproducibility across markets. Over time, this scientific transparency could mirror the sophistication of wine or tea industries, where education, provenance, and sensory literacy inform choice. The contrast between Acapulco Gold and Afghan Kush underscores why this transition is necessary. Marketed for decades as opposite archetypes, day versus night, energy versus calm, they share a chemical framework that nullifies that narrative. The lesson isn't to discard storytelling altogether, but to modernize it, to let chemistry guide the myth instead of the other way around. The narrative of cannabis can still inspire and connect, but it must now align with measurable truths. True cannabis literacy moves beyond labels and percentages toward content, balance, and interaction. It recognizes that effect emerges from synergy, the interplay of terpenes, cannabinoids, and human physiology. For consumers, literacy means no longer buying into promises that don't hold. For bud tenders, it means becoming interpreters of biology rather than repeaters of folklore. For the industry, it means reclaiming trust through honesty, creating products and language that reflect how the plant actually works. This content is for educational and informational purposes only. It does not promote or encourage the use, sale, or cultivation of cannabis where prohibited by law. Always follow your local, state, and tribal regulations and consume responsibly where legal to do so. Nothing presented here constitutes medical advice. For health-related guidance, consult a licensed healthcare professional. All narration and sound design are original. No third-party music or licensed tracks are used. Thank you for watching and engaging with Canon Tel 420. If this exploration helped clarify how cannabis truly operates. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone ready to move beyond outdated categories. Whether it's day or night, where you are, remember, cannabis is more than a label. It's a living spectrum, and understanding that spectrum is the beginning of real literacy.